I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was pleased this morning to rise to speak on the Competition and Consumer Amendment Abolition of Limited Merits Review Bill of 2017. But the first question, Mr Speaker, is how in the world did we get into this mess? How did a nation that's one of the world's leading exporters of coal, of gas and uranium, one of the most energy-rich nations in the world, a nation that used to enjoy the world's lowest cost electricity. How did we get into a mess where we now have some of the highest electricity costs in the entire world? And in fact, in South Australia, they've actually managed to achieve that proud title. South Australia, as unbelievable as it may seem, actually has higher energy costs than places like Denmark and Germany. The world champions, the gold medal winners for the world's highest electricity prices, go to South Australia. And yet here we are, one of the wealthiest and most energy-rich countries in the world. We have average households struggling to pay their power bills. We've had a record number, more than a doubling, of households having their electricity cut off. No more than in South Australia. Their power disconnected totally. So when they walk home and try and flick the switches off in their house, they simply have nothing. We've got tens of thousands of more on payment plans because of the high cost of electricity. We've got many that have had to go back to the good old days, in winter, wearing extra clothes and relying on firewood to keep their homes warm. In summer, Deputy Speaker, we have people that abandon their house because they can't afford to turn their air conditioning on and basically go and camp out in shopping centres during the day. And this in the richest country for energy in the world. In the decades, and in fact in the centuries to come, how we got into this mess will be a study in economics, in universities around the world, and they'll sit there and they'll scratch their head about how we achieved this. And one of the reasons that we've achieved this, Mr Speaker, is because of something that goes under the name of the Renewable Energy Target. And when I say goes under the name, that is actually an Orwellian name, because it's not a target. It is a compulsory, enforced government mandate, enforced by the threat of a government penalty, an extra fine, an extra tax levied on top of electricity retailers in this nation if they do not require the correct number of renewable energy certificates. So it's not a target, and nor is it about energy. Deputy Speaker, it is only about electricity. In our market, Deputy Speaker, electricity only contributes about 1/3 of our carbon dioxide emissions. The so-called renewable energy target has nothing to do with the energy that drives our trucking fleet, that drives our passenger cars, that drives our aviation, our farm equipment. It has nothing to do with gas that people use to heat their homes and to cook with and industries use. The so-called renewable energy target is actually only about electricity. And it's not about things being renewable, because renewables certainly ain't renewable. When you look at the coming problems that we have with wind turbine blade waste, around the world it's estimated there will be millions and millions of tonnes of wind turbine blades which are made up of composite resins and polyesters and fibres that simply cannot be recycled. These so-called renewables, millions of tonnes worth, will need to be buried in landfill. And the same thing with solar panels. Solar panels only have a life of 10 to 15 years, so-called as being renewable. In the near future, the solar panels that were previously rolled out under generous state government subsidies will start to mount up, broken and disused. We will have to bury millions of solar panels, useless solar panels broken in landfill around the country. And what is the cost? What is the cost of this policy? We've had the Australian newspaper, to their great credit, recently add up some of the cost, and they came to a sum of $60 billion. By 2030, the renewable energy target and various other schemes that this federal government has implemented on both sides of the House will cost $60 billion. That's around $2,500 for every single man, woman and child in this country. The average household of 4 is looking at a cost of something, Deputy Speaker, something around about of a cost of $2,500 per person. We're looking at around $10,000 for every household of 4. And this is only the federal government costs. On top of that, we have the state government costs. We know the cost of their jurisdictional feed-in schemes. Last year, added to consumers' electricity bills of $772 million. These schemes are nothing more than a reverse Robin Hood, taking from the poor, forcing up their electricity prices and giving the money to rich green people. Take the Grattan Institute's report into solar energy, titled Sunrise, Sundown, How Australia Can Finally Get Solar Right. And I quote directly, they said, by the time the subsidies have run out, households and businesses that have not installed solar PV, mainly the lowest income earners in this nation, will have spent more than $14 billion subsidising households that have. A $14 billion reverse Robin Hood. And they concluded, the lavish government subsidies plus the structure of the electricity network means that the cost of solar PV take-up has outweighed the benefits by almost $10 billion. And they are just the costs of the direct subsidies. They're also the cost of the hidden subsidies. The additional cost onto the network of hooking all these new wind farms and solar panels up to the grid. We know in Western Victoria, where there's plans to put more wind farms in, Deputy Speaker, where there's plans to put more wind farms in, the cost to improve the grid to enable that is over $1 billion. That cost simply goes on to households' bills. But the real cost is the cost of the hidden subsidies and the distortion to the market. The distortion that artificially forces dispatchable power out of the market and replaces it by forced government mandate with intermittent and unreliable sources of power. This distorts the entire market. So where we've seen promises of the cost of wholesale electricity, and if someone comes to you and starts talking about the price of wholesale electricity, they either do not know what they are talking about or they are a spiv that is trying to con you. Because the cost of wholesale electricity is only one component. But they told us, all the experts told us, if we have this renewable energy target, the cost of wholesale electricity will go down. It hasn't gone down, it's doubled. We have a cost of wholesale electricity at the moment of over $100 a megawatt hour. And what most Australians, I think, don't understand, Speaker, is that the renewable energy target ratchets up year after year after year to 2020 by the requirement that we put upon the electricity retailers to purchase renewable energy certificates. Now, those renewable energy certificates are generated by a wind farm, for example, when they generate 1 megawatt hour of electricity. That entitles them to create one renewable energy certificate, which must be purchased in a certain quantity by the electricity retailers. Last year, the requirement that we had on was for over 21 million certificates had to be bought. This year, 2017, it's jumped up to 20 million certificates that need to be bought. The current market price of those certificates are over $80 a megawatt hour each. So you simply do the sums. You $80 a megawatt hour, the cost of the certificate, by 26 million, and you come up with something like excess of $2 billion. That's the cost that gets added on to the price of consumers' electricity. And next year, we require the retailers to buy 28 million certificates, the year after 31 million certificates, and by 2020 we require another 33 million certificates. And then on from there, from 21 to the year 2030, we require them to still purchase 33 million renewable energy certificates every single year. So the next decade, that's 333 million certificates that we must purchase, that must be purchased by the electricity retailers, which will simply only add up the price of electricity to consumers in this nation. Now, Deputy Speaker, the problem that we have in the market is that we do not have enough dispatchable power. But you must have dispatchable power at least in excess of what your peak demand is. But yet, because we've seen coal-fired power generators closed down, and in fact not only closed down, but blown up by state Labor governments. Normally in a war, if you're fighting in a war, the first thing that you do is you try and target and blow up your enemies' coal-fired power stations. We have Labor governments in Australia that have that as a policy. So we're short of dispatchable power. That is the reason why, and there has simply been no incentive for business to put more money into investment to replace that dispatchable power because of mad policies like the renewable energy target. So we're left with a shortage. And why won't business invest? They say certainty. Well, Deputy Speaker, who is going to invest and put their capital in a coal-fired generating power station that needs a return at least over 20 to 30 or 40 years when they know there's a chance of some mad, left-wing, Green, Labor's government, potentially that could get into the government in office here and sit on this side of the House and pull the rug from underneath them. And we see complete and utter confusion on Labor on this point. We look at the amendment moved by the member for Port Adelaide, and he talks about a lack of national energy policy causing an investment strike in new electricity generation. An investment strike in new electricity generation. But yet in his same speech, he talked about the renewable energy target underpinning substantial investment in new electricity generation. He doesn't seem to know whether he's Arthur or Martha. It just shows they either do not understand it or they are misleading the Australian public. We have ample investment in more unreliable and intermittent power in this nation. Something like $6 billion worth of investment is underway now, but that is not what the market needs. The market needs investment in dispatchable power that you can turn on with the push of a switch. And of course, we have the Minister for Port Adelaide saying that coal is a legacy technology. A legacy technology, the Shadow Minister. And let us hope, let us pray that he is never the Minister for Energy in this country. Because someone that is this misguided, he talks about coal being a legacy technology. Well, I don't think he should tell that to the Chinese that have like 28,000 megawatts of coal-fired generation under construction. The Indians, 176,000. The Turks, 69,000 megawatts. The Indonesians, 46,000 megawatts under active development. The Japanese, with 43 new coal-fired power stations. And yet we have the alternate energy minister in this country thinking that coal.
The member's time has concluded.